Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, here with just some thoughts and editorial on recent developments in sports. Unfortunately, and it's a sign of the times, doping is once again in the news. Lance Armstrong, who has been a tremendous athlete away from cycling in terms of being a champion for cancer survivors through his Live Strong campaign, he's really inspired a lot of people, was recently again accused of doping by a former teammate, Tyler Hamilton. Hamilton, of course, is not the first athlete who has accused Lance Armstrong of doping. Armstrong, at this stage, since the doping allegations go back to when he was ruling the roost in the Tour de France several years ago, can only point to his drug tests to show that he was not doping. Armstrong's argument, and it's his best evidence, is that he took drug tests, he was tested before these races, and he passed the drug test. Not only that, the drug tests were rather rigorous. They tested him for steroids, they also tested him for EPO, and he was able to pass those tests. Now, in boxing, we don't even have blood tests for EPO, right? And it's sad because, as Lance Armstrong knows, the way that he can show that what he did was historical, that what he did was worth our attention, was by pointing to his drug test results. In boxing, unfortunately, the boxers can't even do that, right? Urine tests don't find EPO. EPO, of course, gives you such an advantage in an athletic contest that requires endurance. That, of course, EPO was a very popular drug, apparently, among drug offenders in the Tour de France. And, of course, EPO would certainly be the kind of drug that would help a fighter in a championship match that's scheduled to go 12 rounds. Keep in mind, regular matches go 10 rounds. In a championship match, you're not only facing a champion, by definition, you are also required to go an extra 2 rounds, right? Any drug that will enhance your endurance is certainly a drug that would give you an advantage in a championship match. Now, clearly, drug testing, blood testing, right? Not urine testing, but blood testing that can detect drugs like EPO is needed in boxing because keep in mind, boxing is a sport in which one of the reigning heavyweight champions has admitted to having used steroids as an amateur to come back from injury. And of course, you can do the Google search. I invite everyone to research what I'm saying. Of course, this athlete was supposed to be his country's representative in the Olympics. He actually was denied the opportunity because of the positive steroid test. He's now one of the guys ruling the roost in the heavyweight division, right? He has one of the titles. Keep in mind, too, Oscar De La Hoya had the misfortune of fighting not one guy, but fighting two guys at a minimum who either failed a drug test or later admitted to be doping when they fought De La Hoya. And keep in mind, it's pretty devastating because De La Hoya actually lost multiple fights to one of these guys, and one wonders how much higher De La Hoya's position would be in the sport's history if he actually was able to fight on a level playing field. Keep in mind, too, that a former heavyweight champion who's a surefire Hall of Famer was actually, part of an HGH probe. His name came up when, of course, investigators determined that the doctor they were investigating actually had mailed HGH to this future Hall of Famer's address. Uh, Not only that, one of the fighters fighting this weekend in a middleweight championship fight actually once failed a drug test for a diuretic that helped him make weight. And as boxing fans know, making weight is a big part of the sport. I believe that the issue on the use of drugs in boxing is a huge issue simply because if you look through the history of the sport, you're going to find that some of the biggest names have been busted for the use of performance enhancing drugs. In fact, there's another future boxing Hall of Famer, great fighter, actually once was the middleweight champion. He won the heavyweight championship only to be stripped when he tested positive for steroids. And it's stunning because, of course, if he were to have been deemed the heavyweight champ, then he would have, somehow found a way to go from 160 all the way up to heavyweight and to actually win that belt as well. It would actually have put an extra luster on his resume. Now, my point to you is when great fighters are using steroids, you can only imagine what hungry fighters are doing in the sport. And I believe the media has this issue wrong. The issue always seems to be focused on whether or not there's a level playing field for a particular opponent, right? Any opponent who says, hey, I would like for there to be drug testing in my match is automatically branded as someone who is afraid, someone who wants to make excuses for potential loss, someone who wants to spread rumors. We always focus on that particular matchup and the person who's complaining about the need for a drug test. I believe the issue is much deeper than that. The reason why we need blood testing in boxing, apart from a level playing field in an individual fight, is actually to validate the integrity of the performance, right? It's actually to be able to put the performance in a historical context. Boxing fans I know, when they see a great fighter, it's not just about that fighter. It's also about that fighter's place in history. Put another way, Bernard Hopkins' biggest opponents out there, and he knows this better than anyone because he's a student of the game. His biggest opponents out there aren't Chad Dawson or Jean Pascal. Those aren't his biggest opponents. Rather, his biggest opponents out there are Carlos Monzon and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Right? When we sit down and we look at great fighters, the question is always, well, how would he do against the best in his weight class in history? Right? You're not just fighting your opponent, you're actually fighting history. Right? Floyd Mayweather, quite frankly, he can fight people like Shane Mosley. I believe Floyd Mayweather knows, certainly Roger Mayweather, his trainer has discussed this, knows that Floyd's biggest opponent is Sugar Ray Robinson. Right? You're going back in history and you're saying, well, wait a moment. This guy looks great. How does he match up against the guys we consider to be the best ever in his division? Manny Pacquiao, let me just say, Manny Pacquiao, his weight gain, his ability to be dominant across several different weights really does indicate that his opponent in history is Henry Armstrong. Right? You want to compare great fighters with Hall of Famers who accomplish similar feats. right? Henry Armstrong at one point actually held, at a time when boxing only had 8 weight classes, Armstrong held 3 titles at the same time. These are the kind of great accomplishments that we want to compare and contrast current great fighters with. And so my point to you is this: as Lance Armstrong has learned, fans want to know when they're comparing you that your performances were authentic, that your performances aren't enhanced in a way that Sugar Ray Robinson's performances weren't, right? I think we all understand that a great fighter on steroids is a guy with an edge on a great fighter who doesn't use steroids, right? That EPO is used by athletes for a reason. It's because it gives you an edge, right? Above and beyond the performance that's taking place in an individual fight, right? Whether or not it's a level playing field, there's a much bigger question, and that question is simply, as a fan, is what I'm seeing authentic? Does it have integrity? Can I look at the dominant performance and then say to myself, wow, this performance is worthy of a comparison to Carlos Monzon, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Henry Armstrong, Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey, Jack Johnson. The people who should be insisting on being tested to prove to the public that they belong in that conversation are the great fighters today. Whether their opponents demand testing or not, when great fighters know that they're doing historical things that warrant comparisons to the all-time greats, they should be the first to say to the fans, look at me, I'm clean, I have the tests to prove it. Not just urine tests, but I have the blood tests to show that I was not on steroids and I was not on EPO. I was not on drugs that did not exist when Joe Louis ruled the roost. So you can actually compare me to Joe Louis, right? If you see me giving a performance and that performance is worthy of a historical comparison, you can make that comparison because I am clean and my performance is authentic. That's why we need blood testing, quite frankly, in boxing. Let me make a recommendation to the powers that be in boxing. Obviously, the decision to some extent is the fighters, because we have here in the United States many boxing commissions, and very few of them seem to realize that you need a blood test to test for EPO, right? And so obviously some fighters can say, hey, I've satisfied commission requirements, even though those requirements, quite frankly, are deficient. What I would encourage WBC, the IBF, the WBA to do is to literally have a little symbol. It can be an asterisk or whatever, but this would be a positive asterisk that they could put next to a fight result when the winner of that fight has subjected himself to rigorous testing and, of course, is tested free of EPO. Let's also not play games. Different drugs clear the system in different amounts of time. EPO can wash through your system quickly. New steroids are water-based, they're not oil-based. You need random testing because if you test the guy on a schedule 15 days before a fight and the guy knows that he can juice and have the drugs clear out of his system, or that he can take drugs the last 15 days because he's not getting tested again, then that testing's not going to work. So I'm not accusing anyone here of using steroids. I don't have that information. But what I am saying is that drug testing helps everyone because it establishes the integrity of the performance. Thanks for watching.